All financial support for this podcast comes from my patrons on patreon.com. If you'd like to join in with patrons, please check out patreon.com/DarwinGrosse. That's DarwinGrosse. Now enjoy the podcast. Okay, today I have the great pleasure of speaking to somebody who actually reached out and was talking to me about their artistic practice, and I was really intrigued because it actually hits on a couple of things that are really hot button items for me. And so I was really anxious to talk to him and find out a little bit more about how he does the work that he does. His name's Scott Lawlor, and he is an artist. He has a Bandcamp site that is just kind of jaw-droppingly full of releases. He's done an awful lot of work. And we'll be discussing that kind of in depth because that's at the heart of at least some of what I'm so curious about. So with no more ado, let's talk to Scott. Hey, Scott, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to have a chat with me. I gave kind of a strangled introduction there because I didn't want to give away kind of some of your secrets, but why don't you describe your artistic practice, your work?
Well, my work, it varies a good bit. I dabble around a lot in ambient music as well as solo piano, even some progressive rock. I've covered some old Pink Floyd material, and I've done a lot of work with drones. I've got one album that's 5 hours long. It was done with all just radio, with shortwave radio transmissions. But I like to do a lot of different kinds of things. I don't like to just regurgitate the same thing over and over. So I try to be pretty varied in what I present to people and how I compose things. Sure.
Well, that makes sense because one of the things that kind of caught my attention when we first started talking is you're like, hey, I'm an electronic musician and I've done 250 releases. And I was like, I don't think that I've talked to 250 people about any release that I've done, let alone done that many releases. And so, I went and checked it out. And first of all, I mean, some of these are extraordinarily long in their form. The work is incredibly varied. It goes there's a bunch of stuff, and a lot of the stuff that I first interacted with was kind of dark ambient stuff, the kind of things that I listen to a lot on Stillstream and some of these other streaming things or that I interact with some net labels on. And so that's pretty familiar territory to me, but you did a lot of music, but also there's some stuff that is kind of very light and almost new agey. You do this solo piano work, which again is some of it is very spacey, some of it is very focused, and you even do some things that I would consider kind of on the experimental end of stuff too. And so you're going all over the place. I have to say, first of all, what is your motivation to do that many releases? What has you motivated to do that?
Well, I'm a stay-at-home dad. My wife says my job description is I'm a stay-at-home dad who writes music for horror films. And I like that description, even though I haven't written any music for horror films. I could. I have a lot of time, and I do a lot of my work at night when everyone else is in bed. People usually ask you, how the hell do you create so much stuff? And I'm like, I drink more coffee and get less sleep than anybody else in the house. So that's how that works. But yeah, a lot of the music that I do is just all over the place. And I tend to sometimes be all over the place too, as like when I give these interviews, I meander off a lot, and sometimes it's hard for me to stay focused on things. So that could probably explain part of the variance in the different things that I do. So right. I don't want to do this again. This is boring. I want to do something else.
Sure.
And so I'll sit down at the keyboard and I'll write or improvise, and I'll listen to it and I'll decide if I like it and I'll release it.
Now, I noticed a lot of the stuff that you do is actually live recordings, whether it's stuff that you were performing and you recorded during the performance, or maybe some of it you just did live recordings. Is that kind of part of how you think of doing your work is largely as this kind of live and performative result?
Yeah, a lot of my work is it's unrehearsed. I just sit down and start playing. In fact, I used to be a DJ on stillstream.com.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my albums were done from live sets on there, but I've also got things that I've been doing, these isolation concerts that I've been doing on YouTube since the 1st of April.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of my things I'll just sit down and just start playing, not rehearse. Now there are some things that I've worked on where I obviously had to do a lot of meticulous practice and rehearsing. If you think of things like Echoes or Atom Heart Mother, even albums like Soul Journey, which is one of my favorite albums. The second track on that album, Divine Presence, took a long time to do because it has a lot of layers, and it took me a while to figure out what chord progression I wanted to use and how did I want the song to progress. Yeah, a lot of my stuff is just improvised off the top of my head.
Sure. Now, the other thing I noticed is that there were a number of releases that looked like they were collaborations. And I'm wondering, how then does that work? You release stuff under the name Nox in
Tempesta, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's me. And Jamie Lickfeld, who lives over in the UK, he goes under the name of Sevenism.
Okay.
And I think he came up with that title a while ago because we wanted to do something different. And that's different, all right. I don't even remember what it means. I think it's Latin.
Right.
Most of our albums have Latin titles. And the way that we do our collaborations, and the way I do collaborations with almost everybody, is I'll send somebody a drone usually through Dropbox, and then they'll add something to it, and then they'll send it back, and I'll listen to it. And if I like it, we'll decide on a title. And they usually do the artwork because I'm blind, so it's hard for me to come up. I can't do my own artwork. I have to rely on places like Unsplash, or other people who would be willing to do artwork for me. And obviously I offer to pay people to do artwork, and some have accepted that and some haven't. But yeah, collaborations, I'll send them material. They'll add some things to it. They'll send it back. And if I like it, then we'll release it. Or sometimes I'll just add more things to it, and we'll just keep doing that until we're both happy with the collaboration.
Sure. That sounds pretty amazing. And I mean, do you do a ton of back and forth, or is most of them just kind of once or twice back and forth?
Most of them are once or twice back and forth.
Yeah, okay. Because I was going to say that my thought was that, especially if you're starting with a drone, there's kind of a lot of material there already, so it probably is more nuanced additions than anything, right?
Yeah, because if you start with a drone, I mean, that may sound like a lot of material, but it's really still an open canvas for the next collaborator to improvise over.
Okay.
And I've done a lot of collaborations with people from all over the place. Poland, the UK, the US, Israel. Wings of an Angel is probably the person I've collaborated with the most.
Yeah, I noticed that, right.
Yeah, he's from Israel. But I enjoy collaborating. I'm working on a collaboration with Rand Kurlian. He's from Spain. And I'm working on another collaboration with Luigi Verona from Italy, two people I've never worked with before. And those are turning out to be really fun collaborations too.
This is really great. How did you get in contact with these people?
Well, Luigi, I've heard his music for years on Soma FM.
Okay.
And I just wrote to him one day like, hey man, let's work on something together because I like your music and it's pretty cool. And I think we could make something that would be really unique. Because
that's cool.
Yeah, because each of us has a unique voice, and so when you blend those together, it creates something pretty interesting.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because I would say listening through your work, even there's hundreds of releases there, so I can't say that I poured over them all.
Yeah,
but as I did kind of,
I can't even keep up with myself.
Right. But as I dropped in on different ones. Very different styles, but very much of a specific taste. I mean, there's like a Scott Lawlor flavor in those, and it's kind of interesting that you have sort of developed this voice that's able to exist in all these different kind of genre landing spots.
Yeah, my solo piano work. Somebody told me that they felt that my solo piano work sounded a little bit like Harold Budd.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's an interesting compliment. I never thought about that, but I guess I could see the resemblance a little bit because my piano playing is pretty spacious and the progression between chords is pretty slow mostly.
So I'm curious. One of the things I like doing in my podcast is talking to people about their background and how they got to be the artists that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me a little bit about that? How did you get, first of all, how did you get into music in general? And secondly, how did you get in a position where you felt where you found that voice, right? Because actually finding a personal voice is something that, this is another thing I wanted to talk to you about specifically, is that, finding your individual voice is something that a lot of people, they're not sure how that happens. And you seem to have done it. Maybe it was just in some very organic way, but I'm curious if you have, what are the touch points along your musical journey that represented things where your ears opened to new ideas, maybe places where all of a sudden you were like, this is the music I was meant to create. What does that musical journey look like?
Well, I've always been interested in music. When I was a kid, my parents, they got me cassette players and turntables and little toy pianos and drum sets to play with and stuff like that. And one of the things that I would do would make these collages using records and tapes. When I was a kid, I'll make all these weird sound collages. And my dad used to work for IBM. And what he would bring home these cassette tapes that were with the programs that he had been working on. Because back then, a lot of the programs for computers were on cassettes.
Right.
And I would take those and just put them in my tape player and just let them play all the way through. And I was like, man, this is great. This is really cool. And my dad was like, gosh, I hope you're having fun doing this. He probably looked like I was crazy. And so I was like, man, this is really neat. I like this. And I've been trying to see if I can find copies of those on the internet because they were really cool.
Yeah.
But when I went to college, I got a degree in English and then another degree in psychology. And I wanted to be a novelist, but then that didn't work out. So I went to grad school, started a degree in counseling. And when I was in grad school, I got a keyboard. My first keyboard was an Ensoniq SQ1. Oh, wait, no, actually, my first keyboard was something my parents got me back in like 1988. It was some kind of an old Casio. And I think I made a tape of some stuff from that a friend of mine probably still has. The Ensoniq was the keyboard that really made me get into working on music. And so I started writing more new agey stuff that was inspired more by people like Suzanne Shawnee, Yanni,
right,
and other people like that. And I dropped out of grad school because it was too soon for me to actually going right from college to grad school. So this is in Akron, Ohio. I left grad school and I started touring around, playing at different coffee shops and restaurants from about 1991 till about 1997, maybe. And for all that time, my music was all new age. But then I heard a Robert Rich sleep concert that somebody sent me on cassette back in like 1996. And I was like, I'm going to try to write something not exactly as long as that, obviously, or whatever. But I want to try my hand at space music because I've listened to John Surrey and Steve Roach,
right,
and Robert Rich as well. And so then my album Time's Escape, I originally wrote that in 1997. It wasn't released until 2013 on the World Ghosts label.
Okay.
Then I would play that out at like coffee shops and places. And people told me that I got some rather strange looks from people because that wasn't what they were used to hearing from me because it was totally different.
Right, sure.
And then I had a long break from music from 1999 until about 2012 because I moved down to Florida. I got a job working with a software tech company. And I did that for a couple of years. Then I met my wife in 2004, moved out to Texas. We got married. And I did a little bit of work here. Now, I played in music ministry in a church for a little while, but I got pretty disillusioned with that because the guys during rehearsal, they wouldn't really want to practice a whole lot.
Right.
And I wasn't at an advantage where I could read the sheet music and everything else. I had to do it all by memory. And they had keyboards and guitars they could practice at home. I couldn't. I didn't have a keyboard. So I was like, you guys need to help me figure all this stuff out.
Right.
And I felt like I was on another level from them in terms of profession and quality. Not that I'm better than them, obviously, but just
Just
something
different. Yeah.
just different. And people always said that my piano playing brought something really, really interesting to the performances. It gave whatever they were doing a whole new dimension and all that. It was just hard for me to keep practicing with them because they didn't want to really practice a lot. And so I just ended up leaving. No hard feelings or anything. But then I got a Ensoniq TS12 in 2012 on Craigslist, and I just started working on some albums, and I discovered Paul Stretch.
Oh, that'll do it.
Yeah, Paul Stretch.
Good
and I was
night,
like, okay,
Irene.
I can make, yeah, Paul. So in a lot of my early albums, you can hear the artifacts of how much I used Paul Stretch. I mean, and that's okay because, you got to start somewhere with exploring things and everything. So, but I just started working on more and more things, listening to more and more music. I even got into noise. I got some noise releases up there too, inspired by people like Merzbow and other noise artists. There are some other noise podcasts I listen to. Yeah, so that's how I basically got to where I am. I mean, I don't play out live anymore. All my equipment is pretty integrated into the physical space over here, so to take all that apart would just take too long.
Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned is that you're blind. Is it like total blindness, or is it sight obscurity? How is it? Does it affect your vision?
Well, I was born blind. I was born 3 months premature, and the doctors gave me too much oxygen because my lungs weren't fully developed. And so I've got what they call RLF, I can't remember how to pronounce it all, but
right.
It's something that I probably shouldn't have even gotten anyway, because even back in the 60s, there was technology available so that doctors didn't have to give the premature babies so much oxygen.
Sure. Well, the reason I ask is because what you just talked about as your musical journey is one that is a pretty aggressive one, no matter what is the situation. I would think that some of these things would be very difficult, like you mentioned that, you're in this trying to work in a worship band, and, you have to do stuff off of memory because you can't be depending on the sheet music. I mean, you've put yourself in a lot of positions where, sight issues are a problem. I have to say, what is it just that you've decided that you're not going to let any of that stuff stop you? Is that just kind of a personal, what I'm saying?
Yeah, and my blindness is, sure, it's an inconvenience at times, obviously, because I can't drive, so can't go to the store, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there are other things you can use, like Lyft and Uber and all that. But it doesn't define me. I don't allow it to prevent me from doing anything I want to do. And the worship thing, there were people at church who would, they would pray that I get my sight back. And that's getting into a whole nother thing. So I don't know if you want to go down that road.
No, let's not. Please.
No, we won't go there. But no, my blindness doesn't impede any of those things. Hell, I've jumped out of airplanes.
Yeah, well, that's cool. I think it's actually amazing that then the way that you sort of like move forward with this stuff, it then all of a sudden makes it even more impressive that you're doing these like 200 plus releases, because the process of doing a lot of releases is kind of a site intensive thing. You mentioned, you've got covers that you have to do. There's interacting with the websites because you're using Bandcamp for this. There's a lot of that mechanism involved in it. But even putting together a studio, interacting with your collaborators through email and through Dropbox and stuff, you're just doing it.
Well, I mean, there is technology out there. There's speech for the computer and speech on the iPhone, and actually on the keyboards now. I just got a keyboard a couple of months ago that has speech built into it, and so that makes everything totally. In one way, it makes everything easier, and then in another way, it makes things more difficult in terms of decisions about what sounds to use, because there are so many more sounds.
Oh, sure, of course. Right.
On my Roland keyboard, I had like 2,000 sounds. On this keyboard, I have 27,000.
Right.
So it's crazy. I'm like, okay, what sound do I use for this? And then I can spend hours just going through sounds trying to figure out what I want to play.
Sure, I'll bet. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the style things that you do. First of all, you mentioned that you've done some really long form stuff. I noticed that there were many releases that were well in excess of 2 hours long. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you had one that even went as long as 5 hours. Now, other than kind of the influence of Robert's sleep concerts, what is it that draws you into doing long form work like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I never really thought about that. The long form works are really immersive. It allows for the development and expansion of a concept more than something short would. Although people would probably say conversely, if you write something really, really short, then you're forced to
to be focused. Yeah.
Yeah, you're forced to be focused. So there we go, that focus thing again. But the long form is just, I like the long form. It can take you on a journey that you can't get with the shorter works. At least that's how I see that anyway.
Sure, that's interesting, but it's also, it kind of puts a stress on you as the songwriter. What do you do to prevent yourself from falling into traps or tropes or kind of like following the same chord progressions just because they always tend to work for you? Again, doing the amount, this is where I get back to like my curiosity related to the amount of work that you're doing and the variance in type. But how are you doing that amount of work and not finding yourself falling into repetitive patterns?
Part of that could be the release schedule, because I'll write a lot of different things. They may sound similar, but I don't release everything at once. Obviously, I've got a ton of stuff on my hard drive, got maybe another 200 or 300 albums.
Oh my goodness.
So I might write a lot of things that have a similar sound, but then I'll find something in my back catalog that sounds totally different from what I've been working on. And I'll like, let me release this because this sounds different than what I released before. And so it's a combination of being willfully, consciously intentional to be different all the time. But there's also an element of, I have such a big archive of things that I've written for the last 6 or 7 years that just in writing that amount of stuff, there's going to be more variety anyway.
Right. It sounds to me, when you were talking again about your journey, it sounds like kind of in 2012, you kind of restarted stuff up. Is most of the stuff that you've released here, is that mostly since 2012?
Yeah. Everything I've written since then.
Oh, okay. All right.
The only old thing that I've got to release is called The Lost Archives. That's actually material that I wrote back in like 1991.
Oh, okay.
And it's on the Studio 4632 label, but I'm going to eventually be putting that up on my Bandcamp page, because a lot of times what I do is I'll release something on a label and then I find out that the label's gone, so the music's gone, and I didn't know about it.
Yeah,
I'm like, you guys could send me an email just to let me know you're going to take down the page, and that's okay, but let me know. So I've decided that I'm going to put everything on my own Bandcamp page so that if a label does just disappear, my things are still available.
Yeah, that's especially a problem with net labels, because net labels have kind of a, people sometimes get into them for all the great intentions in the world, but it actually takes a lot of effort to maintain, keep on top of the stuff, interact with the people that are both developing the music and consuming it. So there's a lot of work there, and that tends to make them go away.
Well, and there are a lot of reasons that net labels could go away. You never know. The person could have died.
Right.
We don't know. Yeah. Maybe somebody reported the account. Bandcamp's got this report account button now, which wasn't there before. They've only had that in the last, year maybe? And I'm like, this is new.
Yeah.
So you just never know. And I don't hold ill will toward labels who just disappear, because I don't know why. And for me to assume that I do would be pretty judgmental, and I don't want to do that. But I still stand by, if the label is going to disappear and the person knows, it's a good practice to at least send out a courtesy email to your artists to let them know if you can.
Right.
Yeah.
So all those years of touring around and doing gigs in coffee shops and stuff, you weren't taping your work at the time?
Oh no. Nope.
So there's another couple hundred albums lost, right?
Well, the thing is, I was playing mostly the same stuff though, because
Uh-huh.
I only had that one little tiny sequencer. The SQ1, it was, I think it hold.
The sequencer built into the SQ1 is what you were using?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah. What I would do is I would spend like the 1 or 2 days before the concert building a bunch of backing tracks for what I wanted to play,
Mm-hmm.
and I would leave tracks empty with the instruments that I wanted to improvise over in the live setting
Oh,
with what I had recorded.
got it.
And I remember there were a couple of times when the sequencer crashed, so I lost everything I did like the day before the show. So I had to stay up
Jeez.
like all night to recreate everything and then go out and play. So yeah, that's happened a couple of times.
That's wild. Now,
Yeah.
what was the draw? So that was kind of an era when you were doing solo piano, and you said kind of new agey type stuff.
Hmm.
What was the draw of that kind of music to you? It also sounds like you had this kind of like background current in your brain somewhere that still remembered playing your dad's computer tapes. And
Hmm.
so and at some point you decided to like find a way to merge those, I guess, or at least give both of them a voice, right?
Yeah. Well, when I was growing up, I listened to a lot of classic rock and stuff like that. But then in like 1980, I think it was 1986, I was listening to a program called Musical Star Streams. And before that happened, I was into like heavy metal. So I was listening to Slayer, Morbid Angel, Obituary.
Right.
I even had the long hair to go with all that. And then I heard White Eagle by Tangerine Dream. And I was like, man, this is really cool. And that was the turning point for me to get into New Age. I went out and bought every Tangerine Dream album I could find,
Oh
like you
my
do
God. Like you
when you
do.
find out about a new
Right.
artist.
Yeah.
And then I got into some other artists. I heard about Liz Story, who was a piano player,
Hmm.
then Kitaro, and one of my friends turned me on to John Surrey. And so it was a pretty quick journey from metalhead to New Age guy.
Wow. Now, did you study piano in your youth, or is this all self taught?
I'm mostly self-taught. I had a couple of years of piano lessons. I had a year of piano lessons in high school, which was actually cut short by an unfortunate accident in woodshop. Because when I was in woodshop, I accidentally cut my hand on one of the machines that I was
Right.
working on to build something for someone. So that took away like 4 or 6 weeks of piano lessons.
Oof.
But I was learning how to write chords and things like that. And then I didn't have any piano lessons until I went to grad school, and this woman in grad school was teaching me about how to play scales and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And then after that, I went back to school for a little while in the mid 90s to study music a little bit. And the piano teacher that I had, he was trying to teach me how to play classical. And when I would go off the path and play my own thing, he would say, "You're improvising again," in that,
As if you're
in that
sinning.
yeah. And I was like, man, the hell with this. I'm not going to do this anymore. I just left. I'm like, man, you guys with your, I'm just going to do my own thing. And so I'm mostly self-taught though.
Got it. Sure. So why, with all of the different kinds of music you do, why have you decided to just label it all with your name rather than trying to come up with like, my noise band name is going to be, Trash Cans, and my solo piano name is going to be David Glory or something. You basically have, in a way, it's almost, and I don't want this to sound pejorative because it's not meant to be, but it's almost like some of that stuff you don't care about. You don't care about the labels that people give to different kinds of music. I mean, your music is kind of presented as, here's my stuff, enjoy it. And the one you enjoy today might be a new age sounding solo piano. The one you enjoy tomorrow might sound like, like a rake on a tin roof.
Yeah,
And
it could be. Yeah.
yeah. And you seem to not worry about that. It seems like that's something that doesn't resonate with you in some way.
I think in our society, we're too hung up on labels. There's so much tribalism across all areas. One thing I want to try to do is break out of that. So I don't. Now, my noise project does have its own name. It's called Spank Hookers, and I'm putting those on my Bandcamp page slowly. But I didn't want to try to have different Bandcamp pages for different things because it's hard to get a really big following on Bandcamp. It takes a long time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think I've got 639 followers. Who's going to be 640? and so, and so I just feel that it's better to put everything in one place and the audience can decide what they like. And that could change from day to day too.
Sure. So when you interact with the listeners or your like fans, do they tend to have like a couple of albums that are favorites, or are they just fans of your music and take whatever you put out there? Again, it's like you're so unique in the way that you're presenting your music. I'm actually kind of at a loss to ask the normal questions because a lot of these things are outside the bounds of what most other artists would do.
Yeah, and that's good because I don't like normal questions anyway. So.
Well, there you go. Good, you came to the right place then.
Yeah, there you go. It's when I look at my sales, I think the things that do the most well in terms of selling are the drone based works. Mm-hmm. Like my drone excursion series, there's like 26 of those, and those sell pretty well. But the albums that I spend a lot of time on, like the cover albums or things like that, those don't seem to get as many sales as the things that I just improvise off the top of my head.
Well, that's really interesting. And you think that might be because people that you have developed as your followers have come from that drone era? You said you used to be a DJ on Stillstream, for example. Mm-hmm. Is it that because you've kind of developed connections with people in those areas?
Maybe. Yeah. It's hard to tell because the people who write now, I think there are some people who just buy everything. Mm-hmm. I think most artists are going to have those kinds of like people who just get everything anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But some of them could have come from Stillstream because I was, playing back then because I was a DJ from 2012 to 2016.
And for people who don't know, people who didn't interact with Stillstream at the time, it's a thing where the DJs oftentimes did live performances in conjunction with maybe sometimes playing other people's music. So I think it's important for people who didn't experience Stillstream to understand that.
Yeah, and the station is actually still around too.
Yeah.
And then Drone Zone, that's another one. I don't think the DJs play live on that, but some of my work has been played on Drone Zone here and there. But yeah, a lot of my show was called The Blind Flight, and it was on for all those years. But most of the time I would just play other artists' music, and my performances on Stillstream would maybe last a half hour or so out of a 3-hour show.
Right. I'm still wrapping my head also around the fact that these long-form pieces are oftentimes performed live because they're really quite intricate. And I'm curious, first of all, the instrumentation. What is kind of the instrument layout that you have in your studio?
Well, I've only got one keyboard.
Really?
Yep, I've got one keyboard and a computer.
Get the hell out.
That's what I got. And then
I just assumed you were going to tell me that you had like one of these 18 keyboard surround rigs that you kind of insert yourself in when you start, and then you have to get helicoptered out when you're done.
If I had something like that, I would never get anything done because I would always be so confused and overwhelmed by all the technology.
Yeah, okay.
So I keep it pretty simple. I've got one keyboard, which is right now it's the Native Instruments Complete Control.
Okay.
And everything is all virtual instruments. That's something I was nervous to get into that because I came from hardware. The Roland was just a hardware keyboard that I had hooked up to my computer by USB. Mm-hmm. And I was always worried about getting into virtual instruments because I heard so many horror stories about people's computers crashing and then they lose all their instruments. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I just want this stuff to work. And then today I have the technology day from hell. So
you had a bad one.
I'm trying to get this new instrument installed and I can't get it working. So I got to figure that out. But yeah, I've just got the one keyboard and the one little i5 computer over here.
Interesting.
And that's what I play on.
Wow. And you record everything in hard disk, or do you? This is the other thing. Again, given the way that you work, it seems like almost it would make sense to have like an external recorder or something, just like capturing your whole life, because it sounds like you're very willing to just like sit down and just start laying stuff out there. And so do you have like a lot of templates on how you set stuff up? Do you have real easy ways to record your work if you find yourself in the middle of a flow? How does that work?
With my old keyboard, I would use SoundForge to record everything.
Okay.
And I didn't set up any templates or anything. I would just record. I would find a preset on the Roland that I liked. I would make some adjustments to the sound. I would hit record and I would just start playing.
Mm-hmm.
Now with Complete and using Reaper, which is something I just started doing recently,
okay,
I can do things like find different instruments to put on different tracks. And my isolation concerts that I do, sometimes I'll have 5, 6, or 7 different instruments playing at once, and I'll just use the faders on the keyboard, use the faders in Reaper to fade tracks in and out as I want to during the performance.
I see. Okay, so you actually have like built up some backing tracks for yourself to work with.
Yeah, I do it maybe an hour or an hour and a half before the show.
Got it.
There's no video with my concerts because I don't have a webcam.
Right.
They were all sold out during the pandemic.
Nobody still can get them. That's actually a real killer, right?
Yeah, and so if you could see my performance, you would see me moving from the keyboard over to the computer to press other buttons and things to fade up and down those volumes and change and arm and mute tracks and all that. And that's still a little confusing to me because I'll start recording and I'm like, I forgot to arm the track.
Oh, right.
No wonder why I didn't record or I muted it or whatever. And so I'm still getting used to working on this whole multi-track deal. And it's still a whole learning process for me.
Sure. And using Complete as your instrument is that's a pretty aggressive way about going about limitations because, oh my God, there is an awful lot of stuff built into that system. It's really, it's outrageous.
It's crazy, yeah. And I don't even have the Ultimate Edition. I just got standard. Maybe in November on Black Friday, if they have that, or Cyber Monday, I'll get Complete Ultimate and go up to like 90,000 sounds. I mean, why not?
Right, because at this point, it's all lost anyway, right?
I mean, 25,000 sounds. That's not enough. I need more.
Yeah, so, well, I just it is funny that with a lot of that stuff, you literally could spend your whole artistic life just going from one preset to the next and testing them out, right? Which that isn't much of an artistic life, right?
Nope, I wouldn't get anything recorded that way.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's interesting though. I was going to ask you a little bit about these isolation concerts because they are a pretty significant thing, and you've developed quite a stack of them. You've released some of them as releases on your Bandcamp site, but there's more that are on YouTube.
Yep, I'm up to like 32 now.
Yeah. Is it something that you do regularly? I mean, is it like a thing that you have scheduled every Saturday, or is it something that just when the whim hits you, you fire one off?
Usually I'll just do it when I feel like. Okay. Now, I did a lot of them from April, and then when I got my Complete system at the end of May, or in the middle of May, I wasn't able to figure out how to get it to communicate with open broadcast software, so I couldn't do shows for a while. So I was really sad. I was like, oh man, I'm going to miss doing this.
Right.
But I stumbled across somebody's YouTube channel, and they were talking about how to use Tractor DJ in combination with open broadcast system to do YouTube sets. And I was like, oh, I wonder if this dude could help me get native instruments working, get the Complete working.
Right.
And so I connected with him by email, and we Zoomed in, and he was able to get everything working so I could communicate with open box software in YouTube. And it turned out to be an issue with, I had the wrong driver set.
Okay.
Because I was using ACO, and we set it to, I'll have to go look and see what it is now. I don't remember. But whatever it was, he fixed it.
That's cool.
So that was really, I was really happy to start doing broadcasts again on July 1st. And I've done some since then, not every night. Sometimes I need a break from doing all that. So I'll take a couple days, maybe a week break, and then I'll do something else. And sometimes I'll schedule them out.
How's your family feel about you being a studio rat? Because you mentioned that you're kind of a stay-at-home dad that's making horror music, but you've been doing it for a while. How do they feel about you having this kind of, let me just call it what it is, having this obsession about making music and sharing music?
Well, my kids think my music is scary. My wife will tell you that a lot of my music doesn't do anything.
Right.
But she does like the more new age and the more melodic stuff.
Okay.
She's just not a fan of the drones. That's a pretty niche specialty.
Yeah.
But no, they're okay with it. And the studio is just like right out in the living room. And it's nice because the bar is right over my head. So like all the alcohol and the wine glasses and everything else is all right there.
It's perfect. The perfect setup.
Yeah, we got a combination studio and bar right over here with a big flat screen TV.
That's living well. That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, unfortunately, our time is already up. But before we go, can you just talk a little bit about, for people who want to engage with your work, it's a little intimidating to go to a page that has hundreds of album releases. If you were going to pick sort of like a few that really represented kind of the entry into learning and listening more into your work, what are the ones that you would recommend kind of as the introduction to Scott Lawlor's work? I
guess I could give you some of my favorites. Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay. Soul Journey, Transition. That's an album I wrote like 5 days after I came back from my brother's funeral in 2017.
Oh my.
The sequel to Transition, which is called In a Dark Room, a Single Candle is Lit in Memoriam for Those Whose Lives Are Incomplete. That's another one of my favorites. By the way, Transition and that album were nominated for Ambient Album of the Years for 2017 and 2018. Child of Rage is pretty popular. People seem to like that one really well. For Cosmic and Space, for the really long album, the 5-hour one, which is probably my most popular on Bandcamp, is called Journey Through the Boots Void. I'm actually working on a sequel, which is 12 and a half hours long.
Oh, my goodness.
I don't know what to call it yet, though. I started working on it in 2015 after I released the first one.
Right.
And it's still not done.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, good. This gives people a chance, though, to dip in and get a taste of your work. Scott, I want to thank you so much for having this discussion, for taking the time out of your schedule, and for talking us through all of it. I really do appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show. Thanks.
All right. With that, I will say goodbye. Bye now. Many thanks to Scott for having the great chat. As you can hear, during the interview, there were an awful lot of surprises for me, and so it was really amazing to kind of hear how he does his work and some of the challenges he faces in doing it. I hope that you were as inspired as I was. I want to take the opportunity to thank all of my patrons for all of their support. We've gotten a number of new patrons over the last month. I really do appreciate that. That's what keeps us going here. And beyond that, if you have an opportunity and you just want to get a different experience on these podcasts, run over to the Transcriptions site and take a peek at what some of the text transcriptions do. I mean, it's a really great service. It makes things more searchable, and in a way, it's a different way of experiencing the interviews as well. So with that, I'm going to let you go. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop me a line, ddg@cycling74, darwin.gross@gmail.com, or ddg@20objects.com. Thank you so much. We'll catch you next time around. Bye.